Welcome to Learn the Word, the daily Bible teaching program of Calvary Chapel of Delta, and Pastor Doug McLean. Today, we're picking up our study through Proverbs 30 in verse 10 for part 2 of the message, Wisdom for Living in This Generation. So grab your Bible and let's join Pastor Doug.
On verse 10, he began to impart instruction directly. Look at verse 10. He said, "Do not malign a servant to his master, lest he curse you and you be found guilty." So to malign is to speak evil, injurious words, to slander, to speak misleading or false reports about someone. So he's saying don't speak a false report or injurious words about a servant to his master to bring that servant harm or to bring them down. And the reason he said is because you might be wrong. And as you speak something that's wrong, you could damage your own reputation. You might be cursed or treated lightly, losing honor, having said the wrong thing. Romans 14:4 is similar. Romans 14:4, Paul said, "Who are you to judge another servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Indeed, he will be made to stand, for God is able to make him stand." So we have to be careful about making judgments, and be careful about sharing what you've heard. Be careful about coming to conclusions. And not that there isn't a time when you can report something you've observed that you know to be true. For the benefit of everyone involved, sometimes it's important to bring hidden things to light. The warning here is not to speak purposely to make someone look bad and report something that isn't necessarily true, just your judgment about it. That's the warning. Verse 11, he continues, and he said, "There is a generation that curses its father and does not bless its mother." Now, in this verse and the 3 that follow, he speaks of a particular generation, a collective group of people living at a certain time, a substantial group of people that can be characterized similarly. Al Gore is describing a particular generation that shares some characteristics. And first he speaks about this generation that dishonors its father and doesn't praise its mother. They're a generation that breaks the 5th commandment to honor your father and mother in the Lord, Exodus 20, verse 12. So he's speaking about a generation that's thankless and disrespectful. He continued to describe this generation in verse 12. He said, "There is a generation that is pure in its own eyes, yet is not washed from its filthiness. There is a generation, oh, how lofty are their eyes, and their eyelids are lifted up." Notice the words eyes. He's speaking about how they see. He's speaking about their perspective. And he's saying this generation, this particular generation, it thinks it's pure from its own perspective, in its own eyes, but in actuality, it's covered in filth. Interesting, the word filth or filthiness, not washed from its filthiness, that word filthiness is literally excrement. So, mildly speaking, this is a deluded generation that thinks it's fine, but it's actually gross. But the opinion is everything's good, but it's disgusting. Verse 13, he spoke of lofty eyes. The idea is looking down on others. If your eyes are lofty, your perspective is you're looking down on everybody because you think you're higher or better than others. So that's like an arrogant look, arrogant eyes, thinking, this generation, we've arrived at a higher place and we know more than, all the generations before. That somehow we know better than the previous generation. All that stuff is old-fashioned. That's backward thinking. That's the past. That's not now. It's that kind of attitude of looking down on others. Verse 14 continues to describe this generation. He says, "There is a generation whose teeth are like swords and whose fangs are like knives to devour the poor from off the earth and the needy from among men." So teeth like swords, fangs like knives is a picture of taking from others, taking for self, not concerned with the needs of others, driven by one's appetite, not concerning if it hurts others to satisfy it. hurting others for their personal pursuits, taking selfishly, hurting others, being inconsiderate of how what they do affects other people. Now, since Al Gore describes this generation, the Lord is using this revelation to just prepare the reader, to prepare us for this generation that's coming. You look at this description, and he's saying, there's a generation like this. And then he leaves it there and just gives us a report. It's going to be. There is this generation. Leaves it to us to decide whether we're in that generation or not. Kind of reminds me of what Paul would write similarly in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 to 5. 2 Timothy 3, 1 to 5. He said this, "But know this, in the last days, perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitor, headstrong, haughty." That's the lofty look. Haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. And then he said, "And from such people turn away." Look, Paul said those are characteristics of the last days. People loving self primarily, and it being manifest in a disregard, disrespect, high-mindedness, a haughtiness, disobedient to parents, a pride and selfishness. And I think if you look around, that's where we are. You look at Paul's description, you look at Al Gore's description, and I don't think it's too hard to say, yeah, that's where we are. And so he says in verse 15, the leech has two daughters, give and give. There are three things that are never satisfied. Four never say enough: the grave, the barren womb, the earth that is not satisfied with water, and fire never says enough. So he begins to point out there are things around us that are designed in such a way that they preach to us constantly, that they communicate truth. He's saying that there are natural things that we can observe that illustrate profound truth. He begins with the leech. You probably know leech, like worm-like creatures that attach themselves to you and suck your blood. They suck the life out of you. And he's saying leeches aren't satisfied. They want more and more, and they just give birth to more leeches who want more and more. He says, likewise, the grave is never satisfied. People just keep dying. You never get to the point where the grave says no more death. Or you never did until we know Jesus came and he conquered the grave. But from a natural state, natural perspective, we just watch it. People keep dying. And the barren womb is never satisfied. A barren womb wants a child. That's what a womb is designed to do, is give birth. And the earth constantly wants more water, needs it. And fire will continually consume so long as there's fuel to burn. So listen, he's saying, look around. This is natural. This is the way things are. That nature, apart from intervention, apart from revelation, if you just look at nature, is never satisfied. There's constantly a need. There's constantly a desire. That's just the way the fallen world is. And that's one reason why the generation that he just described is like the generation he just described, because they're longing for something, looking for something, always seeking, and there are just going down this path that's leading to these attitudes and observations that he's making. And there are consequences that arise from this selfish, unsatisfied attitude that make it even worse. Look at verse 17. And this is really pleasant. The eye that mocks his father and scorns obedience to his mother, the ravens of the valley will pick it out, and the young eagles will eat it. Wonderful picture. But what he's saying is a perspective. Your eye, remember, your eye is how you see things. The perspective of disrespect and disobedience to parents has a consequence or a result of losing vision, losing the ability to see things properly. And the picture he gives is somebody tied down and a raven coming and plucking the eye out and an eagle coming and eating it, snatching it away. It's a vivid picture of this consequence of disobedience and disrespect. In other words, if a person doesn't honor their parents, they'll lose the ability to see things properly. And when you have a whole generation that thinks they're better than the generation before, they just lose perspective. You don't see things properly. They lose their vision. They can't see right. If they fail to value what their parents say, they'll lose an incredible perspective on life, something that is very valuable in their life. Verse 18. There are 3 things which are too wonderful for me. Yes, 4 which I do not understand. The way of an eagle in the air, the way of a serpent on a rock, the way of a ship in the midst of the sea, and the way of a man with a virgin. So he's talking about the way. That could be translated the journey, the path, the road. And he's saying the way of the eagle. I don't understand it. It flies through the air, but I can't see afterwards the way it took. It doesn't leave a trace. It doesn't leave a trail. There's no path that you can see. It just flies through the air, and it's a mystery to me. And he says, likewise, a serpent on a rock, if it's a hard rock and a snake goes across a hard rock, you can't tell that it's been there. You can't tell the way that it took. The ship as well, as a ship goes through the sea, in a very short time, the sea returns to its condition, and after that initial wake goes, there's not a trail anymore. Eventually, the sea just returns to its condition. And he's saying, I can't see or understand where they went, how they traveled, how they journeyed. Their way leaves no trace, no path, as they travel on this invisible course in a way that I can't see. And then he says, likewise, the way of a man with a virgin. And the idea is that a proper relationship of a man to a virgin results in him not leaving any evidence that he was there. There's no negative impact on her life in any way. That there's a respect for her in her virginity and her purity, where he just keeps off, where he maintains distance, where he doesn't have any negative effect on her. He's not created any paths in her life by going where he shouldn't have gone. In contrast, verse 20, this is the way of an adulterous woman. She eats and wipes her mouth and says, I have done no wickedness. So in contrast with a virgin who is unaffected by her interaction with a man behaving properly, an adulterous woman is impacted by the man. What he's saying is the adulterous woman has sex like she eats food, figuring she's satisfying a natural appetite, eating a meal, that she just has a desire and she satisfies it. And Agur says it's as if she eats and just wipes her mouth and says, I have done no wickedness. In other words, she's satisfied, she gets cleaned up, and then she denies any wrongdoing. And she might do that by hiding it, clearing her chat history, erasing her emails, paying cash for the hotel that she stayed in, or just simply denying, I didn't do anything wrong. And if she's caught, she'll try to justify it. Now listen, I'm saying she because the text says she. You could turn it around and say he. If she gets caught, she'll try to justify, my husband doesn't love me, doesn't satisfy me, but this other guy does. And she says, I have done no wickedness. Look, again, this is that generation that is pure in its own eyes, but covered in filth. He's just elaborating on this generation. Verse 21. For 3 things the earth is perturbed. Yes, for 4 it cannot bear up. For a servant when he reigns, a fool when he is filled with food, a hateful woman when she is married, and a maidservant who succeeds her mistress. So these are things that he says that cause the world to tremble. being perturbed, to tremble, to be agitated, to be irritated, to be upset. He's saying these are things that take away stability in society. A servant reigning as king. And if you were reading this in the days of Solomon, you read about a servant reigning as king, that would be understood as the wrong person ruling. Someone not equipped, someone not trained, someone not experienced, that person may feel very insecure. That person could become very tempted to become a tyrant. That person can tend to mishandle authority. In fact, you might want to study history, and you'll see it to be true that some of the worst tyrants in human history are rags to riches stories. People that came from nothing, and then they get into power, and they use the power to profit personally. They become very insecure, and they learn how to oppress people with their power. The second thing he says, a fool is when he's full of food. A fool that's full of food is likely to be content in his folly, even to feel his folly is justified or that he has somehow merited what he's enjoying. Thinking because I'm full, I must be doing the right thing, and lacking any kind of motivation to turn from his folly. The next thing is a hateful woman who is married. And of course, that would make her husband and everyone around her miserable. And then a maidservant who succeeds her mistress. The classic example of that would be Hagar and Sarah. Remember, it was Sarah's idea to encourage Abraham to have a child with Hagar. But that idea that they didn't pray about, they just did, has created conflict even to this day. So look, there's supposed to be order. There's a way things should be. And when things aren't as they should be, it makes life very difficult. Or you could say it this way, wouldn't life be much better if there weren't any sinners here? Now, with that kind of background of this generation, these conditions, in verse 24, he focuses on lessons for living here in this perturbed world, in the midst of this generation, lessons that you can see in creation, wisdom that's illustrated in creatures that God has designed. So take a look at that. Verse 24, he said, there are 4 things which are little on the earth, but they are exceedingly wise. The ants are a people not strong, yet they prepare their food in the summer. The rock badgers are a feeble folk, yet they make their homes in the crags. The locusts have no king, yet they all advance in ranks. The spider skillfully grasps with its hands, and it is in kings' palaces. So he starts off with ants. They're little, they're weak. Compared to us, they are. They have to work very hard, and they do, to prepare for the future. The thing about ants that's amazing is they know way less about the future than you do. And yet, even with their instinct, they are always preparing for what's to come. And here, Agor is just saying, learn from them. How do you live now? Well, you live preparing for what's to come. You live investing your energy and preparing for the things that are ahead. Then the second lesson is the rock badger, or rock hyrax, or they're commonly called conies. Interesting little beings. They look like little groundhogs. They are, as he says, feeble. They're very aware of their weakness, and so they choose to live in rocks and rock crevices. When you go to Israel, you go to places like down to En Gedi, you just see them all over the place. And in what Agor is saying, learn from them. They walk knowing their weakness, and so they hide in safe places. And we need to walk knowing our weakness and choose to dwell in him, the rock. To hide in the rock of ages that's been cleft for us. To surround our lives with Christ and the things of Christ. The next lesson is the locust. And the locust, unlike the bee, have no leader. And yet they amazingly function together. They swarm together. They keep ranks without a king. And we can learn from them the value and importance of functioning together, valuing our connections and relationships and functioning together. And the last listed here in verse 28 is the spider. Some translations have this as lizard or gecko. They don't know for sure. Sometimes when it comes to names of animals, it's hard for translators in Europe to figure out the word they used in the Middle East years ago. So either way, the lesson is the same. It's a little thing that manages to get into places unnoticed and to live in unexpected places. They're inconspicuous, keeping distance, surviving, seeking to not draw attention to themselves. And we can learn from that as well, to learn to live inconspicuous lives, not drawing attention to ourselves. Remember, John the Baptist said it, that I might decrease, that he might increase. We shouldn't have like a selfish ambition and want to be known. 1 Thessalonians 4:11, that you may aspire to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business. So Algor was saying, these are things that are preaching to us, lessons that we can learn from observing creation around us as we're living now in this age. Instruction from examples of wisdom and competency in our world. Verse 29, he continued and he said, there are 3 things which are majestic in pace, yes, 4 which are stately in walk. A lion which is mighty among beasts and does not turn away from any, a greyhound, a male goat also, and a king whose troops are with him. So these are all pictures of boldness, fearlessness, focus, dignity, courage. You think about a lion, they're not motivated by fear. A greyhound, you just focused on a goal, getting to the finish line. A male goat can be assertive, protective, seeking to lead. A king with his troops, confident, courageous when he's with his troops. So these verses are telling us about walking with confidence, boldness, not allowing our lives to be driven by fear, confident that the one that is with us is greater than the ones that are against us. And so, simple instruction for how to live now in this place that's not as it should be. Verse 32, he says, if you have been foolish in exalting yourself, or if you have devised evil, put your hand on your mouth. For as the churning of milk produces butter, and the wringing of the nose produces blood, so the forcing of wrath produces strife. So this is a picture of a struggle for control, efforts driven by anger and pride, plans that are impure. And in the context here, if you just get this whole picture, he's saying, look, if you look at this messed up generation, if you're looking around and seeing the selfishness and disrespect and arrogance and dissatisfaction and the messed up order of things, and you realize that you haven't been wise, you haven't been stately in your walk, confident in your approach, you're not applying these things in your life, but rather you've been striving, putting yourself first, making your own plans, acting in your anger. He says it's like churning milk. You're producing butter. It's like wringing a nose. You're producing blood. You're producing something that's not going to help. What you're producing is strife. So it's time to put your hand to your mouth. What's that mean? Shut up. Put your hand to your mouth. Stop what you're doing. He's saying it's time to repent. Remember, you cannot battle the flesh in the flesh. No, you can try, but it's not going to yield anything good. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but they're mighty in God for pulling down strongholds. Though we walk in the flesh, we do not battle according to the flesh. So we have to get back to the Word and trust Him and pray, and don't have unrealistic expectations. Don't be shocked when you have a sinful world. It's a sinful world. Don't be shocked when you have a generation that's messed up. The Bible tells us there's a generation that's messed up. It's the world we're living in. But He's given us revelation so we know how to walk through it in a wise way for His glory. And remember, there is one who descended, who also ascended. But He descended that He might die on the cross for us. And He ascended and made a way for us. And He's the one that controls the unseen. And He's the one that sets the limits. Trust Him. His name is Jesus.
In this messed up world we live in, it's so important that we look to Jesus and trust Him. And that's why it's so good you joined us today, to learn His Word and get to know Him more. If you'd like to learn more of God's Word with Pastor Doug, you can listen to any chapter of any book of the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, on the Calvary Chapel of Delta mobile app. Just go to your app store and search for CC Delta to download it for free. And come back tomorrow as we begin the last chapter of the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 31. So be sure to join us as we continue to learn the Word.